Congrats on the National Book Award nomination for your latest novel, Miss Jane. I think most people know that the inspiration for Jane came from a relative of yours, and you spent a lot more time on it than your previous work.
Yeah, what you were talking about is me coming into class looking exhausted all the time,
Yeah.
which is what the last year was like, the last 2 years really.
Yeah.
It was pretty much that way. I was working really hard on it, and over deadline, and at times feeling a little bit panicky, that I wasn't really going to get it. I wasn't going to be able to get it.
Yeah.
It began to slowly make sense. I mean, I think a novel, unless you're just writing a straight ahead, shoot 'em up, bang, bang type thing, and maybe those even do, I don't know, but a novel just begins, takes shape gradually. It just sort of forms. It's a process of accretion almost,
Yeah.
When things.
You have to live with it.
You have to live with it, and you have to allow it to grow and breathe and change and begin to make sense, and not make sense, and then begin to make more sense, and then finally begin to fit itself together in a way that is pleasing.
Yeah, and then try to stay sane throughout that whole process.
And try to stay sane and try to throughout the whole process, which involves a great deal, not only of determination, tenacity, hard work, but also patience.
Yeah. I think you told me once that the book nearly killed you.
I think it did. It did. I had to alter my lifestyle a little bit. It takes a lot of patience to write anything, as you know.
Yeah.
I mean, we talk about this in class, I think. I know I talked about it in my undergraduate class, but at some point you have to, take a deep breath and sit back and say, all right, I have to take this moment by moment. I have to let this moment become real before the next moment can become real. And you have to move. You have to be patient. And that is that can drive you a little nutty sometimes.
Yeah.
You want to get it done. And some things come out more quickly than others. I'm sure you've written stories that have come out that surprise you how quickly they've come out, and then others not yet, and then others that take a long time. I scare you guys, when I tell you sometimes how long I've taken on short stories. I'll bet,
Yeah.
longer than I've taken on novels.
Yeah.
Some stories, in and out of the drawer. I just wait till I can figure out what they're supposed to be about.
Yeah. The first draft will come out quickly. It's the subsequent drafts that take forever.
First decent draft of this, 3 weeks.
Yeah.
And then 3 years
Yeah.
more
Exactly.
work on it, to make it, to get it
Exactly.
right. I had several false starts on the book from something like 2003 until 2012. Because I would start it and realize that if I didn't figure out what this character's medical condition was, I wouldn't be able to imagine her story. There was no journal left by my aunt. She left no letters behind. No one talked about her condition, so no one actually knew what it was. Anyone who might have known was already passed on. And so I realized that I had this an image of a person, some idea of what her life might have been like, but no details, and that I was going to have to imagine about 99% of the story, whereas I went in thinking I would have to imagine about 50%, and then I would be helped out by family stories and records and things like that, but maybe 95%, maybe. So getting under her skin was pretty hard for me, and I wrote a lot of drafts that I felt like did not have the kind of energy that you have to have, to make a character feel alive. And so I realized that what I had to do was let go of what I didn't know about my aunt so that I could try to imagine a similarly difficult life, So I just, in 2012, when I finally decided what the best possible idea for what her condition may have been, I got to start in earnest after several false starts during those first years. And then the hard work began, and I think I must have gone through about 20 full drafts of the book after I got a good one, I thought, in December of 13. When I went away, I got to stay in a cabin in Aspen for about 3 weeks, and I wrote a new draft, and I said, I think this is workable, but it was still 20 drafts away from being workable, actually. I didn't realize it.
Aside from Miss Jane and Jane herself, there's a lot of other fascinating characters in the book, including Dr. Thompson and the father and the mother. And the sister Grace is very memorable as well. What about the other characters?
A little bit of help from family there. You're using parts of different people and also just making people up. So it draws on my grandfather's experience. And I didn't know my grandfather, but my mom told me lots of stories about him. She was, she dearly loved him, but he also had some problems that were exacerbated in a bad way by the Depression. He was hit hard by it, and she told me stories about that. And my mom actually did like to sit there beside him while he was kind of in his own world and talking to himself or people he had run into that day, you know, and having imaginary conversations or repeating conversations he had had. And she would roll his cigarettes for him and hand them to him.
Yeah,
and she
I
loved
that.
That was a cigarette machine. She loved to zip them out and give them to him. And she felt very badly for him, you know, and how hard it was for him. The mother, this sort of bitter mother in the story, she told me a few stories about her grandmother, who was apparently kind of a meanie and wouldn't let her grandchildren even pick apples off the tree in her yard because she was so stingy with them. And I just sort of imagined the mother in there out of what little I knew about her, and it sort of fit. My grandmother did lose a couple of children, and so I applied that experience to someone who didn't have the sweet disposition of my grandmother. You know, my grandmother reacted with sadness, and this woman reacts with anger. And the doctor began as a completely different kind of character. He started out as a kind of a little bit of a buffoon. I'd read a story by William Carlos Williams called Old Doc Rivers, and this guy was a cocaine addict and a drunk and you know, very much an eccentric and kind of a rotund fellow. And that wasn't working. As I went into the drafts, I realized I needed someone who could have a different sort of relationship with the child Jane and the grown Jane than that man was capable of. And so I decided to move him more toward the sort of rumply handsome, you know, sort of attractive character. And at some point in there, I remembered once when I was at Alabama in grad school, meeting E.O. Wilson, the famous biologist, and he was there to get an award, and they said, "What else do you want to do?" And he said, "I want to talk to the creative writers." And we said, "Really?" And sure. So he came over and he talked to us, and he was such an impressive person, so gracious, you know, and also intelligent, and just a warm person you're attracted to immediately. And I kind of got him in my head, and he began to rub off on Dr. Thompson quite a bit without the damaged eye, you know. But his personality, in terms of his personality and what I sensed about E.O. Wilson when we met him, that was a nice source for Dr. Thompson.
Some of the best moments are when Jane is alone, and I think it's because she isn't ever actually alone. She has such an intimate relationship with the natural world that kind of in a way made me feel as if she was living more fully than any of the other characters of the book, and, you know, in defiance of her condition almost, and the limitations that the people around her seem to believe that, you know, she's going to face throughout her life. Could you talk about how that particular part of the novel kind of emerged, the pond and the field and the trees, and it's beautiful stuff.
Well, I think multiple sources really. I walked that land where my mom and my great aunt had grown up. It's all overgrown now, but I had been out there with my mom years and years ago and said, "What was it like when this was a farm?" And she remembered very well, and she would say, "Well, the pond was down here, We had pasture here. We planted tobacco over here. You know, we had corn over here, and so on. So I had an image of it in my head for a long time, combined with an image of the farm my grandmother and grandfather had moved to right before I was born, which was a much more modern place. It had a modern house on it, not a dog trot, and so I sort of put those places together in my head for this farm in this book. And I was a kid who loved to walk around in the woods by myself a lot when I was growing up and just be there, and so I could draw on that. And I, you know, when I was thinking, one of the challenges we were talking earlier about, you know, what was hard about writing the book, well, after I figured out what her medical condition was or would be in the book, then I thought, all right, here's a girl and a young woman who's isolated by her condition, except for family for the most part. What's the story? You know, how do I write an exciting or an interesting story, you know, about someone who's kind of stuck on the farm a great deal of the time? And I thought I would go into the woods. I would go out there and into that beautiful place and be a part of it. Yeah. And so I put her there, started putting her in there, and it began to work. It began to seem natural. There are all kinds of strange things in the natural world, including the strange mushrooms that she finds, you know, which I definitely borrowed from Lars Gustafsson in that great story that I quote, you know, that the boy in that story is fascinated with mushrooms. And I thought that it would fascinate Jane too, especially if she came across the stinkhorn.
Yeah, yeah.
And then was curious about it and asked about it. But so she finds these really strange things in nature which make her feel as if just because she's different, it doesn't mean that she doesn't belong in the world herself. That she also is part of the natural world, even though she's an anomaly, even though she's different. And that she could also be beautiful and interesting.
Did the arduous process that you went through writing this novel, did it teach you anything about the writing process that you might remember going forward as you work on, you know, your next book?
It taught me anew that you have to have confidence in your ability to figure it out and to make it work, even if it seems as if this is beyond you. Once you have developed your fundamental skills as a writer and put in some time and, you know, put out a lot of pages, you have what you need to write just about anything that you can imagine.
Yeah.
And that's, I think you have to learn that lesson. You probably have to learn that lesson every time you write something. Because everything you write is really starting over and learning how to write again, because every story is different, and you have to learn how to write that story. If you're trying to write something original and fresh, everyone is different.
Obviously, in addition to being a writer, you're also a teacher and a mentor to a lot of young people, including myself. What's the relationship between being a teacher and a mentor to young writers and working with, you know, writers who are still really young and still learning a lot, and your own writing life?
In a way, it's like any other day job, you know. It's something that you have to make time for. The writing you have to make time for, and you have to make time for the job. On the other hand, my job involves working with people who are doing the same thing I'm doing. Not only writing, but teaching too. You guys all teach. So there are moments when not only do I learn, and this is not, I'm not just saying this, but I really do learn things from younger writers whose minds stay fresh, and when feel mind getting stale, often you know, there's a kind of renewal talking to you guys about writing, because you are still on fire, and I have to you know, and I have to keep cranking the bellows sometimes, you know, to stay there. So I'm inspired by how hard you work. I really am. I mean, the discipline that the people who come in here, often even the undergraduates, but especially you guys in the Masters of Fine Arts program, the discipline you bring to your work is amazing and inspiring. And I feel ashamed if I, you know, if I let my routine slip, you know, because I get tired or something like that. It also helps me keep up with what's being written today, because one thing about teaching full time is that you spend a lot of time reading manuscripts.
Yeah.
There's not as much time to read books for pleasure, or just books that you think will help you improve as a writer, you know, books that are finished, you know, instead of books that are in progress. But you guys are always bringing in new material, telling me about new writers, and I discover people that way all the time. So it keeps me up to date. So I'm not just some old codger, you know, walking around going, yeah, you're a Faulkner, O'Connor, Weldy, blah, blah, you know.
Yeah.
And since I also have to try, you know, part of my job is to try to introduce you to new work you haven't seen.
Yeah.
And, you know, that keeps me actively searching for stuff that will interest you guys and help you grow as writers too. So it's a good organic sort of relationship, I think. The hard thing is that sometimes it does feel like, I mean, writing takes a lot of time.
Yeah.
And reading manuscripts carefully in order to help someone with a manuscript takes a lot of time. All of these things take a lot of time, so it feels often as if you're working two full-time jobs. It's described, you know, it's thought of as writing is my version of research as a professor, is creative activity. And it's built into the job description. But a lot of people don't realize we're not talking about 40-hour weeks.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it feels like two jobs.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's a lot more goes into preparing and teaching a class, and than a lot of people realize. And there's a lot more that goes into writing a book that people who don't write books don't realize.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't want to sound like I'm complaining here. I love what I do. I'm glad. I mean, I feel very. There was a time when I was younger. I thought, I don't know. This is not going to happen. I'm not going to be able to. I'm not going to be a published writer. I'm not going to get a book. You know, you keep running. There's so much rejection involved, and it's so hard to learn how to do it well enough. You know, that I feel very lucky. I feel very fortunate, even though I got a bit of a late start.
Yeah.
So impressed by you guys when you publish something in a good magazine, and and I'm not kidding. It's a lot better than anything I was writing in graduate school.
Well, that makes us feel good.
No, it is.
I know you've told me that you write from bed a lot. How do you manage your time between teaching and writing? You know, are there days where you find that you don't have time to write?
There's always writing time first thing in the morning. It's just a matter of how much. You know, I mean, some days, there are days when you just feel too busy and you let it go. That's generally happens when you're not in the thick of writing something. But if you are in the thick of writing something, then you find a little time. I mean, even if it's 10 minutes, but.
Yeah.
But I hope to get, an hour, 2 or 3 there, a laptop on a pillow, on my lap, in bed, working on it before the day starts. Mm-hmm. The busier the day is, the sooner that sense of the encroaching responsibilities of the other responsibilities start to interfere with your work, and you have to, let it go.
Yep.
And if you're able, work a little bit in the evening. Again, that happens more often when I'm well into something than it does when I'm starting something or just thinking about what to do next. It was really not that difficult for me to do that in whatever job I've had, whether it was journalism, public relations, advertising, teaching.
Yeah.
When I was still doing a lot of labor jobs, I wasn't really a writer, so I didn't have to worry about being completely physically exhausted. you
Yeah.
know. Although writing actually can be, it can be physically taxing, I mean, because you sometimes get stressed out, and of course that takes its toll on your body. So it's actually important for a writer to try to stay in decent physical shape. It helps you.
Myself and my fellow classmates are going to be graduating soon and trying to find work that will allow us to keep writing. And most of us are working on what we hope will be first books. You said you got started late, and I know that's because you took a long hiatus from writing for a while. I think that's something a lot of us fear, like there's going to come this moment where, all of this young optimism that we feel right now, we're going to start getting those rejection letters and just want to quit.
I had actually had a little success. I published a few stories in decent little magazines, but I thought that I was getting into a rut and that all my stories were beginning to sound the same, and I couldn't imagine myself out of it, and I began to dislike my work, and I didn't want to do it anymore, and I wasn't having any fun. So I thought, I'm just going to stop and do something else. And if I still want to do this badly enough, then I will decide to at some point. And it took a while. It took a few years before I really got my spirit back, and decided to start doing it again. And I realized that a lot of rust had accumulated. So a lot of the work I did when I started writing again, I decided I was going to enjoy it, that I wasn't going to worry. I used to worry a lot about first drafts, and we were talking about this yesterday in my undergrad class. And I said, I'm not going to worry about first drafts. I'm going to write fast first drafts, and I'm just going to have fun, and I'm going to worry about, because I know how to revise, fix them. So this is going to be an enjoyable activity. And so I wrote a lot of rough stuff, getting my way back in, and then slowly, worked on revision. I had a job with I think I had 1 week of vacation, and now in addition to writing a rough draft out, just often in longhand whenever I could on a weekend, I took that vacation, and some friends had an old concrete block place down on the North Florida beach, and they would let me have it cheap. And I'd get it in October when it's pleasant down there, and set up a little table and a chair on the patio, and one of my treasured old portable manual typewriters. And I said, okay, a draft a day for these 7 days. I'm not stopping work till I get a draft of a story. I don't care how rough it is. And then I would go for a run, and then I would come back and have a drink and make dinner and go to bed. And it was, I had a wonderful time. And then when I would go home, I had 7 new drafts, and I could tinker on them throughout the rest of the year. And that's really what my first book came out of, that activity, really. The stories I was writing when I first started writing again most of those haven't really come to anything. They were really just lube work, get the rust off.
Going.
Yeah, blast off the rust. And but the serious work began after a year or two. And I guess I worked on the stories in that book 5, 6, 7 years, I don't know. Just sort of eking them out. I sent 14 stories to my editor when I submitted that book, and she said she only wanted 7, and I added another one that fit with those. I said, I got another one in progress, let me finish that. And so there was a year in the pipeline. So I think I came out a different writer, a very different writer, from that second sort of effort, than I was when I was publishing my first stories while I was in grad school.
When you were working during that time, I know you'd been out of your MFA program at Alabama for a while. So when you were revising, I guess this is coming from my perspective, that the great thing about being in an MFA program is I get this feedback all the time from these amazing writers and these amazing colleagues of mine. And then I use their feedback to figure out how to revise. And I think, over time I'm getting better and better at actually seeing the problems in my own stories. And when you were working during that time, were there people that you were sending your work out to get some kind of response to help you revise? Or was this, you working kind of in this like isolation the entire time?
Well, one of the best things I got out of my MFA program in Alabama was two friends with whom I stayed in touch over the years. And we would send one another stories and write letters back, real letters, about talking about the story and what they thought was good, what we thought was working, and what's not, and so on. And without those two guys, I would have been in a vacuum pretty much.
Yeah.
And so it was great. I don't know if stories wouldn't have been nearly as good, may not have been finished. We just do what we can for one another, and we're still in touch.
There's this ongoing debate always about the value of MFA programs and if they're worth it, I guess. As someone who has been a part of the Wyoming MFA program for like over a decade, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And someone who went to an MFA program themselves, like what you see the value is.
In the huge writing programs, some of the more famous, it must be really difficult for a student to get the kind of attention that a student who, asks for it and wants it here can get. I think the smaller size of our program helps make that possible. I think if you go to a writing program that feels like it's big and feels sort of like a writing student mill.
Yeah.
And I've known students who were my students as undergraduates who went to some of these programs and came out feeling as if it was not that productive of an experience. They spent 2 or 3 years in this place but didn't really come out more assured, more skilled than when they went in. And you can work with teachers in writing programs who actually do what some people criticize MFA programs for, which is, say, write like this. This is how you're going to write your stories or your novel. This is not the way to do it. This is the way to do it. But I think the better program looks at the person, the writer, and says, what are you trying to do? Yeah. How are you trying to do it? How can you? And tries to figure out what you were trying to do and help the younger writer figure out how to get there and not get in the way, And if you're not getting in the way, if you are facilitating and helping and adding, but not prescribing, then it's a good thing. And it's not going to really be any different from what's always happened, which is when people, in the 20s were in Paris and Gertrude Stein was reading their work, she was saying, this is what's good and this is what's not. Now go off and work. And my friends and I that I stayed friends with from my MFA program, and just sort of nurturing one another. And if there's inferior work coming out of the MFA world, what people sometimes think of as an industry, creating, just popping out, cookie cutter writers, and it's in a program that works differently from ours, I like to think anyway.
I think so. Yeah, I think the most important thing is that it allows you, more than anything, to build a community. Like a lot of us have been writing in isolation for so long, and now, we have this community of people that we'll hopefully have for the rest of our lives.
Well, one thing we try to do is we look for writers when we're choosing who should come to this program and work. We look for people who already are writers, who have a pretty good sense of who they are as a writer and have done a lot of work, so that you come in with momentum and you come in knowing what you want to do. And so then we can turn to you and say, I see what you're doing, keep doing it, and we'll do whatever we can to help make it possible for you to do it as well as you can.
Well, thanks, Brad.
Thank you for coming here.
Yeah, of course.
And being in the program.
Of course.